afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another event organized by the Warsaw Institute. Today we'll touch the topic of French election in 2024, which in fact was the snap election recently announced by President Emmanuel Macron. And I'm pleased to introduce my today's guests. I will start with Mihai Sebe, Head of European Affairs Department, European Institute of Romania. Hello, Mihai.
Hello, and thank you very much for your kind invitation. And just before I go on, I'd like to say that my views are my own and do not reflect the position of any academic institution I'm affiliated to.
Thank you. And my second guest today is Michael Werbowski, expert of the Warsaw Institute. Good afternoon, Michael.
Good afternoon. It's great to be back with you. And I will go along with Mihai, and some of my views will be taken from a personal position. But otherwise, I think whatever is said is a reflection of a situation that we're dealing with.
Thank you, gentlemen, to have you on board today to come. The is organized with support of the National Institute of Freedom. And I'll start with first question to you. Pretty general one. I'd like to ask you about pivotal factors that shaped. Am I audible? Excuse me, I had.
Now I can hear you.
Okay,
Yeah.
sorry.
Now we're
We
okay.
seem to have technical difficulties. Let me just repeat the question. What factors contributed to the outcome of French elections that we have now? And can we say that we have clear winners and losers after the 2024 French elections? We'll start with Mihai Sebe.
Hello, thank you for your very interesting question. First and foremost, I must say that these snap elections were a surprise due to President Emmanuel Macron's lack of popularity and also due to the disdain of the public electorate to the political class, seen as inapproachable and distant to the people's need. However, these elections and this result also came in what I like to underline a more general context across the world of democratic backsliding, meaning that in the last decade we have seen more or less the rise of populist authoritarian regimes throughout the world, and this is mostly due to the fact that for some politics, for instance, the democracy seems to fail in delivering adequate socioeconomic goods to their citizens, and this might be an explanation of this democratic backslide. But there is also the problem of institutional cohesion and stability, meaning that often in countries where we have this democratic backsliding, we see the fact that the institutions are not strong enough in order to refrain the predatory political ambitions of various elected leaders. So, having this general background of democratic backsliding, democratic decline, and also in the French case, a very particular lack of popularity of President Macron, we should not remember. We should remember, for instance, the crisis of the pandemics, the economic constraints of the war against Ukraine, the riots and protests of the Yellow Vest in France due to the rise of energy prices. And we see the fact that the elections came and these results came on the background of a very unsatisfied population with the current political evolution. So we have on the one side the general background across the world and also the very specific causes of French discontent toward their political elites. So the results was indeed a surprise, but also we should mention that the second round also came out as a surprise, as we have seen all sort of very ad hoc coalitions done in the second round of elections meant to support the candidates that had a real chance of winning from either the centrist party alliance of Perez and Macron or the left alliance, the New Popular Front, which is a reminiscence of this interwar popular front that was made up in order to counter the rise of fascism in France. So basically, these two particular and general factors came up with the results that at the end of the day were not necessarily a surprise if we look at the polls and we look at how people react in the last years to this sort of crisis that put in danger their way of life and economic and social stability.
Thank you very much, Mihai. Definitely, it was a little bit of surprise after the first polls, but still we have a new composition in France. And now I will move with the same question to Michael Verbowski. Michael, do we have winners? Do we have definite losers? And what factors contributed to the result we have now?
Yes, of course. I just wanted to say that my colleague's overview is absolutely accurate, in my view. And before we get to the question, I'd like to say about the democratic backsliding that was mentioned. It seems that France is really a kind of a weather vane. What I mean by that, it will show the direction where the rest of Europe will go. By Europe, we're talking about the European Union. And it seems that, as mentioned by my colleague, there was so much popular discontent, so much inner domestic rage that had to be expressed. And it came out in these elections where we saw the centrist party minimized, diminished. Macron is definitely weakened. And we saw the far left, some people call it extreme left, and the far right, the extreme right, putting pressure on the center. And this will definitely make France, it may sound a bit dramatic, but ungovernable. And that is a big problem for the European Union because France is a big contributor to the EU budget. Of course, we might get into foreign policy. France will set the tone of what kind of transatlantic policy there will be, relations with the United States, what kind of relations will the EU, Brussels, undertake as far as China is concerned and Russia in a multipolar world. But to answer the question, if there are winners and losers, and I'm speaking here more as a Canadian than a Polish Canadian. In a hockey game, there's a clear winner and a clear loser. Whoever scores more goals, or in Europe, it's maybe football, which I follow. We don't see really who is a clear winner or clear loser. We see a weakened president, Macron, who I think is, sorry to use the American expression, a lame duck president, meaning he's going to sort of, waddle his way through towards the end of his quinquennat or his 5-year term. He's going to be weakened by the fact that his prime minister, Gabriel Attal, will distance himself from the president because, let's face it, it wasn't a victory for Macron by any stretch of the imagination. This snap election was a gamble. Maybe my colleague will see it differently, or we'll see that he lost. And now he's put France into a situation, a very uncertain situation, and the European elites are definitely concerned because we don't know who will be the next prime minister. We don't know exactly how this big tent coalition will work. We know that the left, the far left, Le Nouveau Front Populaire, is very fractured. There are people within this so-called tent which definitely despise each other, are not going to work very well together. And this will obviously be advantageous to Le Pen's party, the Rassemblement National, the National Rally. I think, and I dare say, I make political predictions as a journalist and someone who follows European affairs, and I will say that yes, Le Pen is a president in waiting, and this is something that France will have to grapple with. This is something that the European Union Commission will have to face in a couple of years, the possibility of a Le Pen presidency with a prime minister uh, from her party ruling the government. So to sort of sum up, who is the big winner? The big winner, I think, by default, is the Rassemblement National. That's Le Pen's party, which is a party waiting to seize power at some point. And the big loser is definitely le Macronism, the Macron political ideology of implementing very harsh economic policies, such as raising the pension age, you know, increasing costs. The young people are having very hard time economically, and this is all rallying the populace. The anger that I mentioned before is rallying the populace towards the far right. So I see them maybe not as winners, but definitely their situation is far better off than the fractured, um, uh, very incohesive left, extreme left coalition, which I don't think will last very long. We'll see how long they can govern.
Thank you very much, Michael. At the beginning of your response, you've mentioned the new direction, and I want to continue this topic about new direction in French foreign policy, especially due to situation in Ukraine and in the area of Central and Eastern Europe. How do you foresee French foreign politics under the new government? And do you expect any major changes in this policy? And we'll stay with you, Michael, for that.
Right. So, since I'm on the other side of the Atlantic, the transatlantic relations are key, of course, to France's security. Um, I do believe that you are going to see on the left, that's a part of this coalition, an anti-EU, anti-NATO tendency. On the far right, we don't know what Le Pen's position is exactly on NATO, but it's apparently publicly she has mentioned that she'd like to pull out of the military structures of NATO. Um, so Macron's very ardent support of the transatlantic security architecture is not endangered, but is definitely undermined by these two, you know, extremes, which seem to be coming together. The far right and the far left agree on distancing themselves from NATO, on distancing themselves from the European Union, eviscerating French national sovereignty. And the far right and the far left seem to be somewhat agreeable to closer relations with Russia. And this, of course, for Ukraine is a very uncomfortable situation, because if Le Pen becomes president, again, we can't make 100% certainty of that, and Trump assumes the presidency again. Um, well, the situation for Ukraine will certainly be undermined. Now, as far as French foreign policy, um, I think one of the reasons that Macron, this is related to your question, called this snap election was because his foreign policy is a failure. C'est un grand gâchis, as the French would say, a huge, waste, in the sense that France has not assumed a leadership role in the EU. Germany is calling the shots really on Ukraine. France received and clack, a smack in Western Africa, where they withdrew from some of their former colonies. They've lost influence to Russia and China and Africa. And Macron seemed desperate. He said, I'm going to reshuffle the cards and call a quick election, and maybe this will restore my authority and my prestige on the world stage, which is what it may have done temporarily, because he's come to Washington saying, look, all is fine. President Biden, I've got the situation under control, and France is still the leading Western power in the European Union, and we will continue the status quo. But as I said, with the election of the far right and the far left, his foreign policy will definitely be under attack.
Thank you very much, Michael. Thank you for bringing up the topic of transatlantic relations and NATO, which are crucial in today's geopolitical situation. And now I'd like to address the same question to Mihai Sebe about your view on possible changes in French foreign policy with accent on Central Eastern Europe and possibly Ukraine.
Well, I'm rather cautiously optimistic about how French politics is going to maintain its course during the next year. And why that? First of all, because as my colleague previously mentioned, the new Popular Front is a hybrid structure. It did not exist 1 month ago, and it is unclear if it has a capacity to provide a coherent government for France. So, given in my personal opinion, we may expect for the upcoming year to have more or less a status quo politics, as the French Parliament can no longer be dissolved for snap elections, and most likely some sort of technocratic or negotiated government would be in place. I, however, estimate that we may have indirect impacts on the French foreign policy due to the financial economics problems of France that may require some financial adjustment, and its economic measures may impact the scale and ambition of its foreign policy, especially in Central and Eastern Europe. We may assist more or less to a power shift from the presidential office to the parliament, to the National Assembly and the Senate, and this may result in a rather bloc foreign policy in Central and Eastern Europe, with a lot of negotiations that are not necessarily characteristic to the French political style. As for Romania, for instance, we have here an important military French presence under NATO umbrella, and the presence of the French troops in Romania is an important element in uh, ensuring the security on the eastern flank of NATO, especially in Southeast Europe. And also, France has been a supporter of Ukraine, and this support may come up, and this is a working hypothesis now, to become more or less frozen at the current level, and we may even assist to a decrease of its level of ambition. Just remind ourselves that even a couple of weeks ago there was discussion about sending, I don't know, French military instructors to Ukraine, and this seems to be at the moment out of the table due to the outcome of the elections. However, I don't think that we are going to see necessarily a dramatic shift in the upcoming year as regards Central and Eastern Europe. What matters, in my opinion, is how we can build coherent European security project in the region while also maintaining transatlantic relations. And for that purpose, France's active presence in NATO is important, and also the active French involvement in the wider Black Sea region. Just recently, France, for instance, has decided to work on a strategy for the Black Sea. And we had a series of visits to Romania, to the region, of French experts on how France can build a coherent policy of its own in the region. And this may come up to a stall or may be a little hindered by the political crisis that may come up following these elections. However, I am still optimist in, let's say, the political maturity of the French representatives, as the government most likely won't have a strong right populist component, but rather we may assist to this technocratical or this possible coalition government. So I think that the policy will maintain its great lines in Central and Eastern Europe, and afterwards we shall see how things evolve in 1 year time. So cautiously optimist may be the word of the day.
Thank you very much. So a lot of negotiations in front of us, and thank you for underlining the importance of NATO presence in our region. In the meantime, I'd like to highly recommend our viewers to ask questions to our experts. And gentlemen, now let's move more towards the European Union and the internal situation in European Union. On the day of election, 7th of July, Jordan Bardella from National Rally announced that within the EU, National Rally will join the newly set fraction, which is Patriots for Europe. Now, this is the third biggest fraction in European Parliament. My question to you is, how do you see French position within the EU now after EU elections and the growing support for right-wing National Rally Party within the new European Parliament group? Michael, the floor is yours.
Well, I'm glad you asked this question. I think it's the real, let's say, in a poker metaphor, it's the joker, the card. We don't know how this new um, group or regrouping of far right parties, which comprises, I think the initiative was from Hungary. It comprises the AfD, Alternative for Deutschland, Alternative for Germany. It comprises parties throughout the EU. I believe that um, uh, Geert Wilders may join this grouping, and the European elections gave a big boost to far right conservative parties. And I don't like the term extreme right. They're far right. They could be called ultra conservative. They could be called, uh, I won't use the term anti immigrant. I would rather say that they believe in strengthening border security, which is a very similar theme that the Republicans in the United States are calling for. Basically, you can be for securing borders without being anti EU. I mean, I'm a European citizen and Polish. I can say that many compatriots believe the same thing. You can be for the European Union with no borders within the EU, Schengen, but you would like to see border control so that there's no mass migration. And this regrouping of European sovereignists will have certain political clout in the European Parliament, and they will shape or maybe reshape the Pact on Immigration and Asylum, I believe is the term in Brussels, so that there's stricter border restrictions. Um, and this policy of mass migration is coming to an end. We're seeing popular discontent on migration in Austria, where I spend a good time. We see a popular discontent in France. We see it in Italy. We see it in Poland, in Netherlands, and certainly in Britain, where Nigel Farage won several seats. So this grouping has a future, in my view, and it'll become a more and more, if you want to call it, populist phenomenon, which will drive a radical change in the sort of open borders, that means exterior borders, that we see right now in the European Union. And it will perhaps restore sovereignty to small states who feel a little bit like they've been robbed of their decision-making power by the EU Commission, by Brussels, which is, after all, an unelected body. And the European elections will balance out the fact that the Commission, is in a state where they will impose policies on smaller countries like Hungary or Netherlands or Austria. These parties, these nations of patriots, this grouping will try to restore a kind of democratic balance between a commission which is unelected and a parliament which wants reform within the commission to make migration more manageable.
Thank you very much, Michael. As you said, the group is still growing, and it may even grow more in the future, as there are still some question marks among some MEPs that are somewhere in between few political groups within the EU. But now let's move to Mihai Sebe with the same question of National Rally joining newly built Patriots for Europe group, and what outcomes can we expect from French within this group and in general French within the EU?
Well, this is a very good question, and I must say that this group came up in a way as a result of Viktor Orban's move for being less isolated in the European Parliament following his last year's adventures with Fidesz and the Popular Party and its relative isolation. However, regarding French influence in the EU, I don't think that necessarily French position is weakened. Yes, we have a President Macron, which may have lose some of its aura of know-it-all and European-wide leader. Yet, however, its political gamble was not a total failure, as the right populists did not necessarily obtain the absolute majority in the French parliament. However, the French position in the EU may be weakened by something that is already happening, meaning its economic performance and budgetary problems. And this may weaken the German-French duo inside the European Union. There are problems that may be put on hold for next year, for next couple of years, as we need to advance more toward reforming the EU. I also noticed that the National Rally organization, political organization, has in a way clarified some its more extreme EU anti-Eurosceptic positions. It has become more or less, I don't know, not necessarily moderate, but more approach to the center. And if it wants to have an influence in the European Parliament, then it must, in a way, play by the European Parliament playbook manual. Why do I say that? Because at the end of the day, it came out on the third place in France, and they need a win at the EU level in order to make them relevant. And the fact that they have joined this group may provide its leadership with the necessary EU and also national platform that will bring him more visible. Because at the end of the day, we need to have in mind that most MPs in the group are French MEPs, and most definitely they are not going necessarily to be, I don't know, sidelined by other colleagues in the European Parliament, as they need this platform for their national visibility, and also as they prepare for the upcoming, in a couple of years, but in a politics a couple of years is almost now, presidential elections in France. So they need to have this vision, and they need also a platform to put into practice what they preach about the reform of the EU. Secondly, we need to have in mind that the relationship in the European Parliament are also complicated on the right side of the spectrum. The European conservative and reformists of Ms. Meloni has been outlined by Viktor Orban movement with this new political group. Yet, however, things may change in the upcoming years. So we don't have to take it necessarily as granted for the next 5 years that this group will going to be, let's say, the main focus of, I don't know, Eurosceptic movement in Europe. And also we need to have in mind that it is also the evolution of the war against Ukraine will influence how the group's position inside the European Parliament, and also the outcome of the American election may have an influence on it. At the end of the day, in my opinion, in France, we are going to see in the next year with the politics of reorganization of the parties following the snap elections, and also a way to rethink and reshape their policy, both national and European ones. And also believe that France has been more or less in the last years I don't know, we all remember President Macron's famous speeches about Europe in the last years, had heralded the changes. Yet, however, it doesn't necessarily have the critical mass to change the EU. So, if we have, I don't know, next year a position of, I don't know, reflection of how things may evolve in the future, it may, at the end of the day, serve all the parties involved. Because when you speak about the EU reform, what is the role of France in this process, we need to have in mind the lesson of the past, that we had a project of constitution that was rejected by French voters uh, a couple of years ago. And the idea of changing the treaties is not necessarily one of the most popular ideas. And perhaps what Europe needs, in a personal opinion, should be to better put to use the mechanism that we already have. We still have a lot of unexplored options of working together better in Europe and consolidating the position that haven't been addressed due to all sorts of speeches and discourses about a fundamental reform of Europe. But before the fundamental reform, I think we should start by basics and see what are the problems and what can we do with the existing tools. And this may serve as a wake-up call, because if we look also at the European Parliament elections, the envisaged, let's say, right tsunami that would overcome the parliament did not necessarily come into fruition. Yes, we have an increased number of MEPs that are on the right side of the political spectrum, but this doesn't necessarily mean that we have this tsunami that some pundits predicted in the past. So there is still an important, I don't know, moderate and centrist options that can be further explored in the upcoming years. And these results of the election, of the French elections, may help us better explore it and better put to use the untapped political potential that is still out there.
Thank you very much, Mihai. As you said, we need to first use the existing tools to make some corrections, amendments within the policies, and then look more into the future. And with that positive accent, gentlemen, we've come to the end of our today's discussion. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank you very much for participating today and sharing your views with our observers. And of course, I'd like to highly encourage our viewers to follow our publications and events. On Monday, we are commenting the NATO summit with kind participation of Michael as well. So I highly encourage everyone to watch the online discussion. So gentlemen, thank you once again for participating, and I wish you a great afternoon. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for your kind invitation.